Last October, just over a mile from where we're sitting, there was a mass shooting. 58 fatalities, over 800 wounded. This was horrific on so many levels. But when an event like that happens, and it's happening with increasing frequency, we, emergency medicine, stand at the ready. This is our chosen path. And in the face of overwhelming disaster, mayhem, tragedy, we rise to the occasion. The map behind me is populating with US mass shootings so far in 2018. This is not about politics. This is our reality in emergency medicine. This is about our need to prepare. What you're about to see and hear are the experiences of the Sunrise Hospital team involved in the Las Vegas Mass Casualty response. It's not a comprehensive talk on disaster management, disaster preparedness. This is what did they see, hear, do, learn, so that we can understand and be better prepared for when this happens in our community.
I was sitting at the desk finishing up my charting, as all nurses have to do, and there was a Metro officer there, and I heard his radio go off, and I could hear gunfire on his radio.
Shot fired right at the medical tent. Multiple victims. We got one shot in the head.
I got a page that there was a mass casualty shooting. I just went over to the trauma bay. They said, get ready, we have a mass casualty shooting. And as the radio was, the calls were coming in, you could hear the rapid fire in the background.
At that point, I knew I needed to figure out how big this was going to be. So I'm telling the nurses as I'm passing through all the stations, clear all these people out. And then I give them sort of the quick and dirty plan of what they're going to do. That 20-minute period, I had to set all of this up, so I knew that I couldn't go into fine details. I just have to give them a generalized idea.
Very vividly remember dispatch calling me and saying, there was a shooting at the Country Music Festival. You will be getting a lot of patients. And I'm like, okay, no, you will be getting a lot of patients. And I could almost hear like the shakiness in their voice even, stressing a lot of patients.
We brought every stretcher out into our ambulance bay, and every wheelchair and every staff that could come down from upstairs and in the ER just sort of sat out there in the ambulance bay and waited for, the incoming patients to come in.
We've all been there. You get the call. You know something is about to happen. The calm before the storm. But how big is that storm going to be?
My wife, who is an anesthesiologist, got a phone call from the CEO of the hospital. She said, Nick, I'm going into the hospital. There's been a mass casualty. And within 5 minutes, while she was driving in, she called me and she said, the CEO of the hospital, who doesn't really swear, said, this is an effing war zone. Tell Nick to come in, get his partners. He's operating on big people tonight.
The secretaries went down the list and started calling. They called every doctor, they started calling all the staff, the charge nurse in the OR started calling all of their staff. And, after multiple phone calls, people just started flowing in and, every operating room was open.
I phoned my backup, and my backup phoned another trauma surgeon. So we had that reach out. I called, my residents that were on with me. I said, call the residents, tell them to start coming in. So we had a lot of phone calls made very early, and then we got lucky because the cell tower went down 1 hour into it, so we didn't have any more cell.
Now it begins. You can feel the tension. Preparation is about to become action, and now you're ready. But are you ready?
I pull up to Maryland Parkway, and my Sunrise is right there on the corner. I'm waiting for it to turn green, and trucks are flying by me, and I see people, and I hear screaming.
And when I got there, and I realized this was not a drill. This was not anything that was, misinformation. I mean, this was really on a big scale.
And then I saw my team with the stretchers were lined up. I would probably say maybe 20 to 30 stretchers all lined up. And I was impressed. I was, well, that's impressive. They're already on it.
When I first arrived and seen what I saw in the ambulance bay, and then walked into the emergency department and saw basically a trail of blood. And then the next vision was one of my ER nurses performing CPR on the way to the operating room in front of 20 to 40 patients in the main area, and that's something that I'll never forget.
There's some defining moments in our lives in emergency medicine, moments we'll never forget. And when patients are spilling into your hospital, and whether you're a community ED or a level 1 trauma center, these people are desperate for your help. They're looking to you, and you've got to find another gear. What are you going to do?
We would pull the doors open, grab everybody out, throw them on gurneys, and then tap the car, and then they would take off. And then as they were pulling them off, I'd start eyeballing all these patients and trying to guesstimate, how am I going to tag all these people? Are they dying now? Are they going to die in, a couple minutes or a couple of hours, or they're probably not going to die? And that's sort of how we handled triage.
Trauma surgical triage. Dr. Menace, the ER doctor, was up front. And he was triaging the patients, and then the ones that were less serious, he was diverting one direction, and the more serious patients came to my direction. And then once I started seeing, my serious patients, then I just started triaging.
Pit stop after pit stop, we'd pull these patients out, I'd look them over, and then I would do something I call applied ballistics and wound estimation, sort of a CAT scanner thing where you look at the patient, you guesstimate how long they're going to have to die.
They were an isolated head injury. We would protect their airway, make sure there was no other injuries, and they went directly straight up to the neuro ICU. Kind of the same thing with chest trauma. If there was no surgical intervention needed, they would go up to the cardiovascular ICU where we had pulmonary critical care and anesthesiologists taking care of them, and that really kind of freed up our space in the ED.
Triage, old school triage is great, but this was like a mass casualty where old school triage even needed to be refined.
Mass casualty on this night meant dozens and dozens arriving en masse. Almost 200 in total. First point of contact, simple as possible. Dying, not dying. Where did that bullet go? Nothing complex. Your eyes are the CAT scanner. So what's your next move? And how do you keep track of all of these patients and all of these injuries?
Instead of tagging the patients, what we did was we would group them by severity into the different stations in our ER. So the red tags would go right into our trauma and recess bays. And station 2 is where I put what I call orange tags. These were people who were probably 30 minutes to 45 minutes before they would probably start dying on us. But if they were sort of agonal or had a thready pulse and their mental status was down, they automatically went over into our red tag section to just start getting resuscitated.
So no vital signs. You're using mentation as your marker of perfusion.
It's what allowed me to triage these patients in 10 seconds or less. I would look at somebody, move on to the next one, look at somebody, move on to the next one.
The patients that were coming, were being placed on gurneys out front, and then they were coming back into my area, and we had gurneys all over the place. So we had a major traffic jam right away. So what I was doing was assessing the injuries. So I was hoarding the types of injuries to different pods. So the head injury patients went to one area, chest traumas went to another, and then the belly shots went to another. So I could keep them organized.
Identifying the ones that have seconds to minutes and identifying the ones that have hours. And really take-home point would probably be triage, continue to triage, because that yellow can turn to red and that green can turn to yellow at any moment.
Ingenuity, leadership, fortitude in the face of overwhelming odds. This is who we are. This is what we do. And when I say we, I mean we, the whole team.
You go into a trauma patient, you have a certain role, you do XYZ, you do ABC, and we get it all done and move on to the next person.
It was surprisingly calm. I mean, that was my initial impression. People have described it as sort of controlled chaos. It was actually pretty dang calm. I mean, it had to be.
Literally, the housekeepers saved me. They were moving people so that I could keep doing my job. And they were moving them to the right area. We told them and they went. It was awesome. And they were cleaning. I mean, there was so much blood all over the place.
And when I walked in down the hall to the ER, when I tapped the ER doors, it was like, as those doors opened, the noise, it was just all of a sudden I realized what was going on. And I went around the corner. And I think you've probably heard this, the floor of the ER, we normally have like this thick red stripe that kind of directs the ambulance when they come in. I couldn't see anything. It was just red. It was just people. It was insane, organized chaos.
She happened to lose pulses, so I jumped up on the gurney. I'm doing CPR as he's trying to intubate. And I looked up, and there's nurses and doctors in every trauma bay, and there's patients lining this hallway, and there's a doctor and a nurse all doing the same thing as me. And they're all trying to intubate. We're doing CPR. We're throwing chest tubes in, literally in the hallway. We don't have the luxury of a controlled environment, and there's just blood everywhere.
And it was blind intubation. Put the tube in, confirm with capnometer, and then you're assessing the airway. Any of them that had a gunshot wound to the chest would get a chest tube immediately. And then we kept it real simple.
Any central lines
Not
happening?
going to happen. There was too many people, too fast. You risk getting contamination. You risk complications. IO is really simple, right into the humerus. You can give them 5 liters of fluid an hour in the humerus, about 1 liter an hour in the tibia. Kept it real simple. You give them your pain medication, sedation, and made them comfortable very quickly.
It was airway, 2 chest tubes, or 1 chest tube or no chest tube, and then blood. And that's how we just sort of went through that whole, that initial red tags, right? It really relied on our stethoscope and our skills, right?
You run a single trauma? No problem. What about running 5? What about 10? What if supply can't equal demand? What if patients just keep coming and you start running out of time, space, equipment? The rules in mass casualty are different. It's not comprehensive treatment. It's how do you keep this person from dying right now so they survive to the next step in care? You are thinking about the life of the one, but also the lives of the many.
It really boiled down to just ABC for us, right? We would secure their airway, we'd fix the hemopneumothorax, and then we would fix the hypotension. And that pretty much was it, right? That's how we resuscitated so many people with so few doctors, was because that's all we did. And then we left all of the secondary survey and the stratification to go to the operating room, the order in which they should go, to the trauma surgeon.
It was me and an anesthesiologist working on this young female. She stopped breathing, and he's an anesthesiologist. He's used to working in an OR in a very controlled environment. He's trying to intubate, and he's like, "Where's the suction?" I'm like, "We're in the middle of the hallway. We don't have suction." We just have to do this.
There's no suction. There's no light. We were intubating people in the hallway. And you're looking for the vocal cords, and if you can't see anything, you're swiping the pharynx with a 4x4 and then putting the tube in. Had to do a lot of feel placement.
So the nurse went over to the Pyxis, and she put her finger on the Pyxis trying to grab us etomidate and sucks. I'm sitting and waiting. I'm like, how long does this have to take? And just at that time period, our ED pharmacist happened to walk by. And I looked at her and I said, "Get down to pharmacy, get every vial of etomidate sucks, and bring it up here now, and just pass it around." And she said, "Okay." I mean, that is a complete no-no, but it was one of the major rules we broke that night.
I just look up, and for a moment, even though I know I didn't stop what I was doing, in a moment it was just like, wow, like, what is happening here? And everybody is just working so hard. It's one of those moments I'll never get out of my head, like how everybody just came together and everybody's working as hard as they possibly could for these patients.
We all train for these events. We go by the book, we plan, we put systems in place. But like Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan till they get punched in the mouth. Textbook and real life often conflict, but we still get the job done. We stop and think, adapt, improvise. We learn from success. We learn from mistakes.
And at one point, I remember seeing people in the hallway with tourniquets still on, and I kind of panicked and went, whoa, 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 I got tourniquets on here. I've got no one watching these patients. And then I went and assigned nurses to those patients that had tourniquets to at least check the limb.
Having what I call the Overwatch method, which Dr. Flores calls the Baywatch method, where you have the nurse lifeguard sitting at the center of the station, watching over that stretch of the ocean that they can look over. When someone starts crashing, if they can call it out to us, that's how we were going to end up saving these people.
Know where equipment is. Always know where equipment is, know where backup equipment is. And then after your backup equipment, what are you going to reach for? What's going to be your resource when you've exhausted your resources that you're used to using?
My biggest recommendation is get the gurneys out of your pods, move them into the hallway, so as they come in, there's a steady flow.
I wish we would have had something that Central Supply could have rolled out that just had chest tubes and IV supplies and intubation supplies just right there, instead of running to all the places that we keep those supplies.
One of the things that we've discussed at our facility is basically making, a mass casualty box that has 200 or 250 unique packages for each patient that would involve a wristband, a clipboard with some paper on it, with identifiers to that patient, and each one with a unique name.
Having respiratory therapy set up a station for all the gear, keep that respiratory therapist clean so they're not touching patients, so they can hand off stuff to whoever needs it.
One of the lessons that the hospital learned was there weren't enough communication, whether they were the handheld walkie-talkies or internal phones. They needed to hand them out to more people that took on leadership roles. That would have been beneficial.
We probably should have some prearranged agreement with a sister hospital, whether it's in your group or even if it's a competitor across town, that in the case of some sort of mass casualty incident, you can provide support to one another, because you'll need it. You'll run out of things. You'll run out of chest tubes. You'll run out of intubation drugs. You'll run out of antibiotics. So you'll need that kind of relationship. Have a plan for offloading patients. Especially if you're a smaller center. It is, like I said, it is different from the drills to reality, but those fundamentals will help you in the situation.
Before this event, we would do MCI training and tabletop exercises, and we were kind of just going through the motions. I would take those more seriously. I would look at the gaps of what your hospital system has, and challenge yourself and throw different curveballs in there, and really take those training sessions and the tabletop sessions seriously, because I didn't expect this to happen at Sunrise, but it did. So who knows where this is going to happen next and how the hospitals are going to respond, but it's up to us as physician leaders to be prepared.
This was 3 days of interviews. We're just scratching the surface. Hundreds of pearls, such as how do you document? Think about a slow day in the ER. How's that EMR work? It's not going to work here. What about Sharpies? What about writing on the patient as far as the injuries, as far as the interventions? Paper sounds great. But what happens to that paper or that chart when it's sitting in a liter of blood? A giant Ziploc bag to hold your documentation, to hold your utensils, writing utensils. Something simple. You won't know this until it bites you. Dr. McIntyre talked about lining up the stretchers outside of the rooms and into the hallway or wherever it is that you receive patients. And when you do that, put the head of the bed up so that you know where the head of the stretcher is. If you don't, people will be put on stretchers in reverse. And you don't want to be flipping that double chest tube patient. And do you have EMS and police radios in your ED? If you don't, think about getting them. Because getting as much advanced warning as possible is going to pay huge dividends when those first patients start to arrive. And when they do arrive, it's not going to be easy. So do you think you have what it takes? You do. You have it.
You have the right training, you have the right education. You went into this position for a reason. And just when you think you're going to be at your breaking point, you're not. You will be able to continue on and do exactly what you need to do to save your patients.
You can only do one thing at a time. I mean, everything is overwhelming around you, right? It's crazy around you. But at that point, if you can put your focus on that one individual you're taking care of, and the rest of the triage people are doing their job, or and everyone else is doing their job. If you can focus on your patient and as efficiently and calmly as possible deal with that patient, then you can move on to the next one.
Right is completely redefined. As long as you're taking care of the patients and taking care of each other, it sounds silly, but it works.
I think it's ingrained in every single one of us as ER doctors. In these tough situations where we have to save people who have one foot in death's door. We're this small chunk of the population who can keep it together when everything else is falling apart.
The ability for us to have conquered that night was not a one person, it was a village. And it took everybody in the village to do it.
We had pediatric nurses, we had pediatric intensivists, I had doctors from all over the city coming in. I had plastic surgeon. It was awesome. I had pediatric intensivists, pediatric surgeons taking patients to the operating room and working with our CVT pediatric surgeons. It was spectacular. I mean, it's just a big kit, do the same thing, and they did a great job.
You can do it. You can do it. If we can come in there in the middle of that and make some contribution, everyone can do it.
You meet the patient's families, your patients might be talking to you for the first time. I think that's when it's hard. That's when it becomes, like a real person, I think, to you, is when you see who these people are. That's the stuff that really, says, all right, this is probably why I went into medicine in the first place. Really rewarding.
You can do it. We had several nurses that night that were like, I can't do this anymore. I can't, I don't know what to do. And they, started to have a breakdown. You're like, no, you can do it. You can. Just when you think, could our ER get any busier? I don't think we can do it. Or I can't, our hospital can't handle a mass casualty. You can.
You can do it. That's words I think I needed to hear. Mass casualty, it's always been my greatest fear as an emergency physician. Because I thought, there's no way I can even begin to comprehend how to manage all of these people at once. Confession. When I was a resident, I used to make sure I was off whenever there were disaster drills. True. Because they were so out of the norm of the usual type of EM that I was used to, I was sure that I would fail. And then, when I was a new attending, and I had an actual mass casualty, I felt a little lost. I'm 20 years in now, and it still kind of scares me. But walking through this and learning from this group of doctors and nurses, I see I can do it. You can do it. We can do this. And this is why we are here in this place today, to celebrate who you are, what you do. And over the next few days, we'll learn together, we'll learn from each other, so that when we leave here, we can go back to work recharged and always ready. Welcome to Essentials of Emergency Medicine.